men, because we have men who had life in prison who are now outreach workers. We have men who couldn't find a job. Now they're making a nice amount of money to be able to provide for their families. We have guys who were gang leaders. So, shooters. We have all of these guys who now have the opportunity to be a betterment of their community through the outreach, right? So I think outreach is so important. I think outreach is key.
Welcome to Unloading, a podcast created to share community solutions for gun violence in America. Unloading was created by Gun Violence Solutions of the American Medical Women's Association. I'm Kat, a pre-medical student in Chicago and assistant director of the American Medical Women's Association.
And I'm Minorvi, a fourth-year medical student based in New York. And we're here to show you how individuals across America are responding to gun violence in their communities.
When you hear Chicago, what do you think? Perhaps you think of deep dish pizza that is more like a casserole, famous hot dogs in a poppy seed bun topped with pickles, relish, peppers, tomatoes, mustard, but never ketchup, or maybe even a bustling theater scene and great monuments like the Bean or the Sears Tower. Fortunately, you may also think of the crime rate. It is no secret that Chicago has one of the highest murder rates in the country. In 2022, Chicago had over 600 homicides and 2,600 shootings. This amounts to thousands of families impacted by either a loss of one or more family members and the trauma seeing a loved one shot. Most of these shootings are concentrated on the south and west sides of the city. Nearly 75% of gun violence takes place in just 20 of the 77 neighborhoods in Chicago. This is due to a history of underinvestment in these communities. Today, we have an amazing organization with us, Chicago CRED, which stands for Create Real Economic Destiny. Chicago CRED is an anti-gun violence organization co-founded in 2016 by Arne Duncan, a former U.S. Secretary of Education and CEO of Chicago Public Schools, and Laurene Powell Jobs, the founder and president of Emerson Collective, Palo Alto-based social impact organization. Chicago CRED believes in investing in the community, more specifically, investing in the people within the community to reduce the homicide rates. Their goal is to reduce gun violence by 20% annually for the next 5 years. Chicago CRED does this through 4 main pillars: street outreach, coaching and counseling, education, and job training. The mentors in Chicago CRED engage directly with men and women who are most likely to shoot or be shot through street outreach. They focus on violence interruption, conflict resolution, and proactive peace building. Chicago CRED also offers therapy and counseling for the participants to heal from trauma caused by gun violence and provides coaching to their participants to give them purpose and hope as they heal. Chicago CRED also provides their participants support with getting their GED and support moving into vocational roles. They also ease the transition from the streets to the legal economy. They facilitate training, internships, and development of soft skills. Today we have with us Jason Little, Chicago CRED Strategic Initiatives Manager, and Curtis Toller, Chicago CRED Director, Outreach. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So just to get started, what is Chicago CRED? What does it stand for? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I'm gonna let
and introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Kurt start with that one, because Kurt is basically one of the founders. So,
well, I'm Curtis Toller. I'm one of the directors here at Chicago CRED, which stands for Creating Real Economic Destiny. It was an organization that was founded in 2016 by the former Secretary of Education from the Obama administration, Mr. Arne Duncan. And he just chose to really look at Chicago from a holistic approach as it related to gun violence. So he decided that we wanted to have a transformative reductions in the shootings and homicides here in Chicago.
Yeah, and I'm Jason Little, Strategic Initiative Manager here at Chicago CRED.
You mentioned that it was created to transform Chicago and violence in Chicago. What is your mission, and what are some specific goals that you look at Chicago CRED?
So I think our mission is kind of, really in an opening statement. That's to have a transformative reduction in shootings and killings. But we have a real. Some people think, we're kind of delusional as it relates to some of our goals that were set. But one of our goals is to have less than 400 homicides, which is something that hasn't been done since 1965. And in order to do that, we would have to have an 80% reductions, right, in shootings and killings here in Chicago. And the reason why we thought that was even something that we might be capable of doing it is because when you look at other cities that's maybe a little bigger than us, but when you think about per capita as it relates to population, when you think about Los Angeles and New York, they're kind of on par with us, right? And so we have two times more killings and shootings than both of those cities, right? And so that's how we came up with that number of 80% reduction in less than 400 homicide. But even to get on par with New York and LA, we would have to get down to like 100 homicides. One homicide is too many, right? But we're just talking about this from a number standpoint, which I really don't like to do because, we're talking about human lives here.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I know you said that it was delusional, and some people say that it's delusional, but I think it's important to quantify this. I know, you mentioned like we are talking about human lives here, but if we want change, especially kind of on this broader scale, it's really important to set those goals. And I think the goal that you have is a great one. I know you said that that's the number for homicides. Do you have a similar goal for suicides? Suicides done by guns?
So, that's not one of our focal points.
Okay.
Right. But we do work with young men and women,
Mm-hmm.
who do have the access to the guns. I think we need to start there, right? Let's talk about the access to guns, right? So we really try to prevent, those young men and women from having that kind of access and really try to change their mindset. Because we know that a lot of that, when you think about even shootings and killings, but now we're talking about homicide, that a lot of that comes from trauma. So we view everything from a trauma-informed lens.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's important. We talk a lot about trauma in this podcast, and I think it's important to address it on all levels.
Definitely.
No.
So, Curtis, I know that you helped to find Chicago CRED, but Jason, how did you come upon Chicago CRED? How did you first get involved?
Yeah, so I'm actually from the North Lawndale community, and Chicago CRED was looking for a home to do violence prevention around the city. So they started in Roseland, in the far south side of Chicago, and then they came to North Lawndale. And I was working with an organization at the time, and they came to North Lawndale. I got involved with them through that because we wanted to help the groups in North Lawndale. We had one group that was responsible for 40% of the shootings that were happening in North Lawndale. So through Chicago CRED, we were able to get this group involved and help them to start to deal with their traumas, because Chicago CRED, we offer the clinical part, the therapy, we offer the education. And a lot of our young men, when you say therapy, they automatically think I'm not crazy, right? But then as they sit in the room with the therapist, they start to unload and unpack some of that trauma and they didn't even know they had, because they don't even understand what trauma is at the age they're at, between 18 and 25. So, that's how I got involved with Chicago CRED. I was like when I heard it and saw it, I was so excited because I thought if we had something like this when I was younger, and to help those young brothers and sisters in our neighborhood.
That's incredible. So how did you first convince them to want to go and seek out that help? Because not even my mother likes therapy. You know, she's in her 50s and she's like, therapy, trauma, what's that? So how did you convince them to go and get help and sit down and have these conversations?
Well, so all honesty, right? Our young men get paid to come to our programs, right? So when they come, the first initial thing is the money, right? Man, I want the money. I'm broke, I got things I want to do. So the money is the first incentive that gets them in the building. Then one of the qualifications to get your money is the therapy part. So at first they're thinking like, I don't want to do it. But as they sit in a room and, if you've done therapy, it's like a fresher, the air is better when you walk out of the room. They won't admit it, but that's how we got them involved was we recruited them, then they got into the therapy part, and then they got into the other things of the program. But, having an incentive for those young men to come in was the key.
Yeah, I've never heard of offering like a financial incentive to kind of start these programs and get one foot in the door, but I think that's amazing. Is that funding from the federal government or through Chicago, like the city of Chicago?
So all of CRED's funding is private, so we don't take any federal dollars. But also we do a lot of funding to other programs around. So it's not just we getting the money and we're paying our staff. No, we also fund programs around the city of Chicago.
Right. Wow. That's really cool. So I guess like once they receive this this incentive, they kind of can do the counseling services. What about, I know you guys also have kind of assistance with getting these young men into the workplace as well. How do you get them to transition into that, and what is that like?
We actually have phases of our program. So we have our outreach phase, then we have our P1, P2, which is our program side, and then our guys transition into our ENT, which is our employment and training center. Our guys go through the strategic, we're strategic with our guys. So when they come in at outreach, we know they're 1 foot in, but both foot in, right? We're trying to get them 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And then we have our P1 phase, which now we start to work with them. And we have what we call a base team, which is your clinical, your education, your outreach worker, employment and training, which is your jobs coach. And they come around the young man to help them in each phase to get to the employment and training side of it.
Okay, that's really cool. It's interesting that it's a process. Like they have to go through this one phase, and then once they do that, they kind of, escalate through the rest of it. How do you, like with the initial outreach phase, how do you actually get them into the organization? What is that process like?
So I'll let Kurt take that one because he's the director of outreach. So,
and so we have a host of what I call, specialists, right? That's been recruited from the community, right? And, it's kind of like FUBU, from us, by us, right? We feel that in order to have a transformative reduction in shootings and killings, that we have to work with those folks who are most likely to shoot or be shot. So we find those young men and women who are, from the community, who have a willingness to want to change, but just need some guidance and direction. And then we hire them to work with those groups that's within those communities that are most impacted by violence.
That's excellent. So from when you recruit them or you do the outreach to when they finish their program in Chicago CRED, usually how long is that process?
So there's a difference, right? So what I was referring to were our outreach specialists, and our outreach specialists are those who go out into the community and recruit who we call the participants. And so, there's a somewhat of a number. We say about 18 months, but we have people that's been in our part of our program for about 4.5 years now. So we never close the door on the young men and women, but it's about an 18-month process.
Okay. The other question I had, so Curtis, you are the director of outreach, correct? So you oversee this whole process with the participants, like you were mentioning, kind of recruiting new members and doing the outreach for your organization. Can you just tell us a little bit more about maybe like what you do specifically on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, what I do on a day-to-day basis, it's changed a lot, right? We've grown, right? I remember our outreach team was me and Arne for a long time, right? Then I had a staff of about 20 now, 22 outreach workers who do a lot of the heavy lifting now. You know what I mean? I'm just really there for guidance and assistance and training for them to recruit the participants into the program.
Very cool.
Yeah. So
and Jason was one of my best outreach workers who eventually became the supervisor of outreach, and now he's moved on.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So I can let him finish. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, outreach is what they like to call the tip of the spear for our programming. The outreach phase is the most important phase to me, because in order to get these young men to any level, we have to bring them in through the outreach phase. And it also gives opportunity to men, because we have men who had life in prison who are now outreach workers. We have men who couldn't find a job. Now they're making a nice amount of money to be able to provide for their families. We have guys who were gang leaders. So, shooters. We have all of these guys who now have the opportunity to be a betterment of their community through the outreach, right? So I think outreach is so important. I think outreach is key. I mean, honestly, outreach, you do it in your sleep. You already done it in some capacities, but now you're getting paid to do something that you love to do. Like I ate, slept outreach. Like, man, it was just important. Like, you walk the neighborhood, you're recruiting. You're like, if you're going to the gas station to get gas, you're not on the clock, but you might see a young man, you're recruiting. So outreach is always working and recruiting.
That's awesome. That's really incredible. I think what you summed it up nicely. Like, outreach is the key, because if you don't have that, kind of the rest of the program, the services that you're providing kind of fall apart. So yeah, very cool. The other thing you guys have, like, on your website, I saw that for under coaching and counseling services, you kind of have this beautiful philosophy. And I'll read it. It says, "We reject the notion that Chicago CRED provides a second chance. For many of the young men in Chicago, CRED is their first chance because they've never before had access to mentors, opportunities, or the support everyone needs to succeed. We welcome men into our program like brothers and care for them like family." I thought that was really special. Could you tell kind of like our audience a little bit more about that philosophy and how you see it manifest into your services that you provide?
Oh man. When you think about, and I think you touched on it earlier, that I've been doing this work for about 15 years. And when you first think about CVI, community violence intervention work, it was really trying to stop shootings on the front end and just really prevent retaliation, right? But there were some things missing, right? And so when I came here to Chicago CRED, Arne and myself, we really sat down and we thought about the things that we felt, were valuable in this road to reducing shootings. And one of those things was the trauma, right? Really coming from a trauma-informed care lens, because we believe that the young people that we deal with, young and old, need to be healed, right? And if you're not healed or trying to heal, then you're kind of working backwards, right? Because you're just putting it's like giving the booster shot right before you get given the main shot to try to treat the virus, right? And so it's like working backwards. And so we felt that that to get these young men and women the counseling and the care that we felt was really, really necessary for them to start their change process. Because I can always go back to when I found my mother dead, right? No counselor showed up at my door, right? And I just always thought what would have happened later down the line. I eventually got the care that I needed, in the form of being able to talk to someone, which was my therapist, right? But just being able to relate to these young men and women, being able to or have walked some of the roads that they've walked, and really just giving them some of that guidance and really leading them toward what we call wellness, right? And I think if we keep looking at it from a trauma-informed lens, we'll start to make big strides here, not only in Chicago, but nationally and abroad.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing about your mom. I'm sorry. So you mentioned that with Chicago CRED, this is the first time that a lot of the people that you work with have had a chance. And that's because a lot of the structural issues that exist in the city of Chicago. It's a wonderful city in a lot of ways, but it needs a lot of work. There's a long way to go in Chicago. So what are some of these large structural issues that you see every day hurt the people that you work with?
I mean, these are, and I'm sure that you all can relate to them. These are not issues that just started, right? So when you think about Chicago is composed of 77 communities, right? But 20 of those communities are responsible for 70 to 75% of the violence. But historically, not only here in Chicago, but throughout the nation and even globally, like wherever there's violence, there's usually a lack of resources. And so that's nothing new. And in these communities, which we call underserved communities, there's not fair and equal housing. There's not fair and equal education. And usually they have the highest rate of unemployment, especially those young folks between the ages of 17 and 25. But then we have to even go further than that, right? We have to address the root causes of it, right? Now here, that we attack violence, from a public health issue because, violence spreads like a virus. But sometimes we have to be careful when we think about that, because usually when you think about a virus, you think about just containing it, right? But we're not containing it. We're trying to stop it from spreading. Not only stop it from spreading, but we're trying to cure it, right? And the only way that we can cure this epidemic of violence is really address those root causes, which is the lack of equality, right? And we have to serve those disadvantaged and those who are disenfranchised in these communities if we want to see a better Chicago.
Exactly.
I was just going to ask, I know, Kat, you had mentioned this before, and we were talking about this, when we were preparing for the interview, but you guys address or, cater to a lot of the South Side and West Sides of Chicago. How do you see, what are some ways that Chicago invests in like the North Side, and then tends to divest in the West Side and South Side? And, does that contribute to the problems that we're seeing in terms of like inequality that you mentioned and the lack of resources?
I'll start, then I'll let Jason take over. I mean, it doesn't take like a degree in rocket science to see this thing, right? When you see better, you feel better, and when you feel better, you do better, right? When you think about Ogden Park, right, it looks a lot different from Lincoln Park, right? When you think about Fuller Park, it looks a lot different from Oak Park, right? And so until we can try to get these communities to only thrive the same and equally, right, and stop some of these structural inequalities that's going on and that exist, then we're going to continue to have some of these problems. And I think that we really have to first look at what's going right in those communities, right, that are well off. And how do we make an adjustment to make all of these communities equal?
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I think, we got food deserts. In most of our neighborhoods, we don't even have a Whole Food or a Jewels or a decent grocery store where people can go and get fresh fruit, right? Most of our people in our community shop at your local bodega, corner stores or the gas station, right? Most of our kids are going to the corner store getting cheese and chips, right? So I mean, when you think about that, you don't even have food. How can you even prosper, right? That, and then education. Most courthouses look more appealing than the schools, right? So that's that school to prison pipeline, right? It's not, when you get to a courthouse, the grass is cut, it's trimmed, it's taken care of, but at your school, it's caged up on the outside, right? When you go through the courthouse, you don't see the bars. It's when you go through the back of the courthouse. But when you go through the front of a school, it's bars. It doesn't even look safe. It's not appealing. I don't want to go. And then the education system. A lot of our kids aren't getting the proper education in our community. So until like you go to a school outside of one of our high risk communities and they have iPads and The teachers are welcoming. When you go to a school, so when I go to school, I don't want to go to school and it looks like an abandoned building. I don't even want to be there, right? If I'm caged up, I'm gonna act like a caged up person, right? It's no sunlight. Like make it warm for me to walk in. So I think until we can do that around the city, we can't be one city.
Exactly. That's very true. If you even just sit on the CTA and start from the south side and then ride all the way up to the north side, you can see the differences as you look out the window. It's ridiculous. So thank you. Thank you for sharing, and you're absolutely right. So does Chicago CRED have any community events? Do you host fun community events where people of the community can get together and just eat, relax, chill, talk, socialize, and bond?
And I wish Craig was on the call. So, Craig is our director of that. And man, Chicago CRED does amazing events. And whenever one summer, the weather's a little bad now, but, you all should definitely come out. We'll invite you. But man, we do some amazing events around the city. And not just in our CRED areas, we actually help fund other people who do amazing things in that area. So, I mean, just for example, we have like night and the light events that we're a part of, where midnight we're out, barbecues we're out. During the day we might our family case managers do events for like back to school. I know we're working on back to school events already, right? End of the school year events. So bouncy houses, food, but a lot of community engagement. During those hours of just not just CRED events, but just events around the city, those are the safest times for young people to be out. Those are the times where you'll see kids being kids. So those events are very important. And I think Craig, which is CRED, but Craig does a great job with that.
So it seems like also just going back to what you were talking about with the community and, having a strong education system and, having just like basic food accessibility. I know that you guys have a lot of partnerships within the community. Do you think those partnerships kind of help remediate any of that? Do you what do you see as the purpose of developing these partnerships within your community, and how do those partnerships help with your mission?
So we work for the community, right? And so the only way that we'll get to a better Chicago, right, is that everyone that has a vested interest in seeing these communities better, we have to work together. And the only way that we can do that is through coordination and collaboration, right? And so this is not a one size fits all model. We know that we need a lot of help. We don't believe that we are the solution. We believe that we are part of the solution. And so we want and we need all the help that we can get, and we seek that, right? We're never turning our backs or telling anyone that they can't be a part of this reduction in violence that we're trying to get to. So I believe that that's the only way that we can get there is through collaboration.
Very nice. It's important. Collaboration is important, especially when you're trying to make such an impactful difference, I think. So you talked about kind of your goal is 80% reduction. Have you what have your numbers looked like so far since you guys started? Have you seen a reduction in violence? Kind of how has CRED made that visible difference in the community?
Yeah, and I'll speak for one CRED community, for North Lawndale, right? And I don't know the exact number, but in 2022, 2021, North Lawndale had outdid the city percentage-wise, right? This past year, with collaboration, we have the North Lawndale collaboration, which consists of Ready, Chicago, CP4P, Community Partners for Peace, and then Chicago CRED. We came together. There was a dashboard created by Jalen Arthur, who is the Director of Strategic Initiative, and we were able to map out the community and also provide services between three different organizations that came together. But there's also other organizations doing work in the community in North Lawndale. Also, I don't want to say it just because of this, that we did see a 40% reduction, almost 50% reduction in shootings and homicides in North Lawndale this in 2022. But it was all about the collaboration and coming together.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you think about the city, when you think about the city as a whole, I think now Chicago CRED, either directly or indirectly, we're working in about 25 communities now, Jason, or a bit more.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and so when you think about that, the city as a whole, again, along with our partners, right, and everyone else working, in collaboration together, we've seen about a 22% reduction here in Chicago as it relates to shootings, right? But in our CRED-led communities, which means where we are actually doing direct services, combined West Side and South Side, we've seen about a 33% reduction.
Wow.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. That's really impressive. Thank you guys
We
for the
still have
work
we
you're
still
doing.
have a long way to go, right?
Oh,
We
yep,
have to get
for
we have
sure.
to get the scale, right? We have to get the
Mhm.
scale, and by getting the scale, that means that we have to serve more young men and women that are affected by violence, and so we're trying to get there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for meeting with us today and telling us your stories. Is there anything that you'd like to tell the world in the podcast? Any closing messages that you'd like to give?
I mean, for me, I think, we only would get a better Chicago if we're all together. And that's all working on one accord, everybody doing their part to make a better Chicago. So I think that's it for me.
Yeah, and I'll just jump on the bandwagon with Jason. Like, when you think about community violence intervention, we need to be a permanent fixture, right? We need to be around, just like the police officers are around. They have a job to do. We have a job to do, right? And I think that, again, we can get to a better Chicago because we're all just trying to reduce injury, death, and trauma, right? And we have to get there. And really, just going back to what Jason said in the words of the great Mother Teresa, right? If we forget peace, we forget we all belong together. And so the only way that we can get there is together.
That's right. To learn more about Chicago CRED, visit chicagocred.org. That's spelled CHICAGOCRED.org.